and they're very happy to figure out ways of capturing cattle methane or landfill methane and turning it into electricity that you and I can use. So this inventive spirit that you're speaking to is, really at a critical point right now. And I celebrate everybody in this room who, in my view at least, is making a conscious effort to integrate body, mind, spirit and to bring that to bear on the sustainability question. Extremely valuable capability that you would bring to these discussions. Extremely valuable. So I think that if there is a message here as I wrap up in 2 more minutes.
Oh, no.
Okay. That will be one of the key messages. And perhaps now we can talk a little more about one of my favorite subjects, biodiversity. Because as we mentioned earlier, it is biodiversity that is the productive source for all of the biocapacity we depend upon. What's interesting is that policymakers, decision makers, very rarely get that message. If you look at all of the reports that have been done in Europe and even here in the US, most of the discussions about biodiversity have to do with this sort of ambiguous value associated with intact species and functional ecosystems. Nobody really knows quite how to put a dollar value to any of that, and I think that's begging the question, frankly. I mean, it's not that hard to understand that, if we can measure biocapacity in these terms, all right, and if this is the basis for our quality of life globally, then it's not that hard to begin thinking about managing parks, preserves, etc., so that we understand biodiversity supply in the same way that we talk about biocapacity supply and the relationship between that and this. I don't think we need a whole lot of discussion about how much a wilderness is worth or a national park. Let's just do the right thing. Preserve, protect, restore biodiversity, because by definition, it reinforces our ability to supply natural capital biocapacity. So this is part of the soapbox that I bring when I am given that opportunity. There are other ways of visualizing and measuring, of illustrating the importance of biodiversity. We're talking about it in terms of global land cover, net primary productivity, and even these climate classifications, which have to do with the availability of water, temperature, and so on. All of these things become important for us in terms of trying to illustrate this relationship between biodiversity and biocapacity. Now, if you remember the 5-part model, the importance of managing consumption and of driving down the embodied energy trade, this is just a little bit of self-promotion here, but Global Footprint Network is actively involved in trying to make these connections for governments as well as companies so that we can begin to manage the supply chain more efficiently. Who's familiar with Walmart's recent announcement about requiring their suppliers to rank their products according to criteria that they're developing in conjunction with a bunch of nonprofits? Guess how many suppliers Walmart has globally? Take a guess. How many?
Hundreds of thousands, I would think.
100,000 suppliers.
Wow.
100,000 international suppliers. Think how many millions of products that represents. If they can drive a ranking system for products that come out of that supply chain, and if that can be, if that ranking system can be described in terms of energy reductions or environmental quality impacts, then I think we will have made tremendous success. So this is the 5-part model that we're looking at here. Now, I promised Kirsten that I would talk a little about this population thing, and I want to do that in the context of something that is a growing discussion globally, and that's the empowerment of women, and the really critical importance of rethinking society's relationship between the genders. There is an enormous activity underway to try to minimize violence against women, to optimize education and economic opportunity. It's pervasive, and I wanted you to know about this because it's a really important part of the formula of how to develop sustainable type thinking. These conclusions come out of the UN reports, and I'll provide this to you so you can have copies of these slides and this information later on. But if you think about the significance of this, think about the implications of reconnecting mother and nature, then suddenly the spiritual and the cultural elements of sustainability take on a whole different flavor. And that's subject of my UC Berkeley extension course, which you all have to come and participate in this coming spring. But you know, it's just such an important new activity for us as a species. You know, to think about in overt conscious terms, redefining the relationship between women and men, women and nature, women and culture. All of that becomes extremely important. I want to share this last thing with you. Guess who wrote this report? Empowering Women to Empower the Earth. Take a guess.
Shell.
Price Waterhouse. Watch this. Here are the conclusions from this report. There is a strong correlation between women's educational success and fertility rates. To the degree that population growth contributes to environmental stresses, female empowerment through education and economic activity mitigates the company's ecological footprint. Price Waterhouse. Due to their primary historic responsibility supporting families, women are more careful stewards of natural resources. Right? Empowered women have a greater influence on stewardship practices. As nations grow wealthier, environmental impacts also grow. But you know what? If you put those resources in the hands of women, they might speed. Informed choices by women can mitigate the impact of that growth on environment at discrete stages of development. Now, you know, that's code in many ways for exactly how women's economic and educational success can translate into sustainability, but large corporations are thinking about this. Higher income alone might reduce unsustainable land use by rural poor. Female empowerment in terms of human and capital resources can improve land stewardship and other sustainable practices. Why would PricewaterhouseCoopers be writing these messages?
I wonder.
Well, I mean, a large multinational corporation could have a lot to gain from this in a lot of ways. Because if the world goes into complete turmoil, they're not going to be happy camper either.
They die, just like you or I would die, right? Corporations, and this I'm now telling you from inside these institutions, whole corporations now understand that their survival is at stake just as much as individuals often do. And so they are rewriting and rethinking the rules of future business success. They're redefining what that means because they see the opportunity in these limits.
Some of that fundamental distrust issue too, I guess, along with what we talked about with the
But here's the trick of that. You are going to be in those corporations in another few years, right?
We already are, really.
Already are, exactly. Exactly. And that's why these kinds of pronouncements are coming forward. Because those of us who care and who've grown up into the system are now inside these organizations and changing them in as many different ways as we can. Well, okay, here are the conclusions, perhaps right on time. Kirsten, I don't know. In a peak everything world, we know it's in our self-interest to begin thinking in different terms about biocapacity and understanding limits. There are opportunities in those limits. We've talked about several different shapes that might take. New policies arise. Okay, then of course that's critical too in order for these opportunities to really make a difference. And action becomes the critical thing. Individual action, group action. The well-being of nations, economies, and individuals is at stake. And I think this is my, my sort of self-serving pronouncement here. Yeah, because I'm involved in this, but I think it is possible for us to reshape and redefine the ways in which society, culture, and business and individuals can interact so that we can learn to live within the means of a single planet. That's the overall message that I'd like to bring. So thank you all for this last hour. It's gone.
I have about 10 minutes of just like important info to give you guys before everyone heads off on their own directions for the next 3 weeks. So if we could just enjoy Bill's expertise for about somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes.
What
That'd be
questions came to
great.
mind?
And